I was 42 years old, and I thought I knew exactly who I was. A professor, a choir director, a woman who had chosen her career over everything else and made peace with that choice. I thought the most exciting thing in my life was a well-executed choral arrangement. I thought I was fine. I was so convinced I was fine. Then Violet Adams walked into my chapel on a Tuesday evening, sat down in the soprano section, looked directly at me, and smiled. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about myself became the most beautiful lie I had ever told. But let me take you back to before that smile. Before everything. I have a theory about music. I believe that every person carries a song inside them. Not the kind you learn from a textbook or practice in front of a mirror. I mean the real kind. The kind that lives in your chest like a second heartbeat. The kind that only comes out when you stop trying to control it. I spent 20 years teaching other people to find that song. And somewhere along the way, I lost mine. My name is Hannah Gray. I am, or I was, depending on how you look at it, a music professor at Callaway University in Oklahoma City. Choir director. Faculty member with a spotless record and a carefully organized life. 42 years old. Single. Predictable. Safe. I used to think safe was enough. I used to think a lot of things. It was a Tuesday in October when everything changed. I remember because Tuesdays were choir rehearsal days and I had been dreading them lately. Not because I didn't love music. I did deeply. The way you love something that has become so much a part of you that you can no longer tell where you end and it begins. But loving something and feeling alive inside it are two very different things. And for a long time, I had been going through the motions. Lifting my baton, counting the beats, watching mouths open and close, hearing sound without really listening. The chapel smelled like old wood and candle wax that evening, the way it always did. My students were already in their rows when I arrived, chatting quietly, shuffling sheet music. I set my bag down at the piano, adjusted my glasses, and called the room to attention. We were working on a Renaissance piece. Something structured. Something I could control.
From the top, I said.
Sopranos, watch your pitch on the third measure. They nodded. We began. It was fine. It was always fine. Fine had become my favorite word and my greatest failure. We were 4 minutes into the rehearsal when the chapel door opened. I didn't look up immediately. Late arrivals were not uncommon, and I had a policy. If you were late, you found your place quietly, and we discussed it afterward. So I kept my eyes on the sheet music, kept conducting, kept breathing in and out the way I had trained myself to do. But then something happened that I cannot fully explain even now. The room shifted. Not physically. The walls didn't move. The candles didn't flicker. But something in the air changed. The way the atmosphere changes just before a storm rolls in. That electric, wordless warning that something is coming and nothing will be quite the same afterward. I looked up. She was standing at the back of the chapel. Golden hair that caught the light like she had borrowed it from somewhere warmer. Green eyes that swept the room with a kind of quiet confidence I had never seen on someone who had just walked in late to a place they had never been before. She was younger than me. I could see that immediately, but she carried herself like someone who had already made peace with who she was. Like she had fought that battle young and won. She found an empty seat in the soprano section, slid in without a word, picked up the sheet music from the stand beside her, and looked at me. Not at the music. At me. "Sorry I'm late," she said. And she smiled. It was a small smile. Private almost. Like she was sharing a secret only I was meant to receive. I looked away first. "From measure 12, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I deserved. Her name was Violet Adams. I learned this after rehearsal, when she approached me with her hand extended and introduced herself the way someone does when they are completely comfortable taking up space in a room. I shook her hand and told her she was welcome to join the choir as long as she committed to the schedule. I used my professor voice, the one that kept people at a professional distance. She tilted her head slightly, like she found that amusing, and said, "I'm fully committed, Professor Gray." I watched her leave the chapel and told myself I was simply noting a new student, cataloging her the way I did all my choir members. Nothing more. I was lying to myself before she even reached the door. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my professional life. Choir rehearsals, which had felt like pleasant obligations for years, suddenly became the part of my week I thought about most. I told myself it was because we had new repertoire to master, a winter concert approaching, logistics to manage. I was very good at telling myself convincing things. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. Violet sang like she meant every word. That sounds like a small thing. It isn't. After 20 years of directing choirs, I can tell you that most singers, even talented ones, hold something back. There is always a wall between the performer and the performance. A layer of self-consciousness. A fear of being too much. Violet had none of that. When she sang, she gave everything. Her voice was warm and deep for a soprano, with an edge of something raw underneath, like a wound that had healed beautifully, but still remembered the hurt. It was the most honest sound I had heard in years. And it undid me, slowly, rehearsal by rehearsal, like stitches being pulled from something that had been sewn shut too long. I learned more about her gradually, the way you learn things about someone when you are pretending not to pay attention. She was 34. She had a degree in computer science and a second one in music theory. She had co-founded a technology company that built educational software, and she was currently developing something new, an AI-driven platform designed to transform the way music was taught in schools. She spoke about it with the kind of passion I used to reserve for Brahms and Beethoven. The more I learned, the more unsettled I became, because she was not supposed to be this interesting. She was not supposed to make me think about her on Sunday mornings when I was grading papers. She was not supposed to be the reason I changed my blouse twice before a Tuesday rehearsal. She was not supposed to walk into my carefully ordered life and make it feel, for the first time in years, like it was missing something essential. But she did all of those things, effortlessly, without even trying. It was Dr. Pearson from the faculty committee who first told me about the grant, the Callaway Innovation in Education Award, a prestigious university competition open to faculty and affiliated researchers. A substantial funding package for whoever proposed the most revolutionary approach to modernizing education in their field. Applications were due in 8 weeks. I stayed up until 2 a.m. that night, my kitchen table covered in notes. I had ideas. Good ones. I had spent years thinking about how music education was failing students, how it prioritized technical perfection over emotional expression, how it left behind students who didn't fit the classical mold, how it needed to evolve. I had sketches of a program that could change things. I had just never believed anyone would fund it. But here was the opportunity, right in front of me. I started writing the proposal the next day. 3 days later, I found out Violet was entering the same competition. I heard it from a colleague in the hallway, casual as anything, and I stood there with my coffee cup halfway to my mouth and felt something drop inside my chest. She was proposing an AI-driven music education platform. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I understood. My ideas suddenly felt older,
slower,
like handwritten letters competing against instant messages. I went home that evening and sat at my piano without playing it, just rested my hands on the keys, felt the cool ivory under my fingertips. I told myself I wasn't threatened, that our proposals were different enough to coexist, that it didn't matter. But underneath all of that, something else was happening. Something I didn't have clean, professional words for. The idea of competing against Violet felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with the grant. She found me in the faculty library 2 days later. She came around the corner of the shelf quietly, the way she did everything, and sat down across from me, without being invited. She set her laptop on the table, folded her hands on top of it, and looked at me. "I heard you're entering the Innovation Award," she said. "I am," I said. "So am I." "I know." A pause. She studied me with those green eyes that always seemed to be reading something beneath the surface. "Does that bother you?" I considered lying. It would have been easy.
I was practiced at it by then.
But something about the directness of her question made the lie feel too small for the space between us. "It complicates things," I said carefully. She nodded slowly, like that was an honest enough answer. "I don't want it to." I looked down at my papers. "What do you want, Violet?" The question came out softer than I intended. More personal. I felt heat rise to my face immediately and reached for my pen to give my hands something to do. "Right now," she said, "I want to understand what you're building, because I think we might be building toward the same thing from different directions." I looked up at her. She was leaning forward slightly, elbows on the table, and there was something open in her expression that caught me off guard. Not the confidence I had grown used to. Something quieter. Something that looked, unexpectedly, like hope. "Tell me about your project," she said.
So I did.
We talked for 3 hours. I don't know exactly when it stopped feeling like a conversation between competitors and started feeling like something else entirely. Maybe when she laughed at something I said, genuinely, fully, not the polite laughter of someone being professional. Maybe when I caught myself leaning forward to match her posture without realizing I had moved. Maybe when she said, "Hannah, you understand something about music that most technologists never will," and used my first name for the first time, and I felt it land somewhere behind my ribs like a note struck perfectly in tune. By the time I gathered my papers and said goodnight, the library was nearly empty and the windows were dark. I walked to my car alone, slowly. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment without starting the engine. I pressed my fingers lightly to my own sternum, as if checking for something. There it was. That second heartbeat I had told my students about. The one I thought I had lost.
Faint.
Unfamiliar.
Terrifying. Alive.
I drove home with all the windows down despite the October cold. I needed the air. I needed something to clear the warmth that had settled in my chest and refused to leave. I told myself it was intellectual excitement, the stimulation of a real conversation after years of surface-level faculty meetings and predictable rehearsals. I told myself Violet Adams was simply a fascinating person and that what I was feeling was nothing more than the pleasure of being genuinely challenged for the first time in years. I was still telling myself these things when I walked through my front door, dropped my bag on the floor, and stood in the middle of my quiet, orderly living room. And then I did something I had not done in longer than I could remember. I sat down at my piano, and I played. Not from sheet music, not from memory, but from whatever was moving through me in that moment, unstructured, unpolished, searching. A melody that didn't have a name yet, that was reaching for something just beyond its own edges. I played until midnight. When I finally stopped, I sat in the silence and admitted something to myself for the first time. I was in trouble. The beautiful, irreversible, terrifying kind. And somewhere across the city, I was almost certain Violet Adams already knew it. There is something they don't tell you about falling in love when you are 42 years old. They don't tell you that it feels nothing like you remember. When you are young, love arrives like a song you already know, familiar, expected, easy to sing along to. But when you are older, when you have spent years carefully building walls and calling them wisdom, love doesn't arrive like a song. It arrives like a storm. And storms, I was about to learn, do not ask permission. The university's request came on a Thursday morning, delivered in the bland, bureaucratic language that academic institutions use when they want to dress up an order as an opportunity. Dean Hartwell called me into his office and explained, with his hands folded neatly on his desk, that the university's annual donor showcase was 6 weeks away. It was the single most important fundraising event of the academic year. Major contributors would be in attendance. The board wanted something extraordinary, something that demonstrated Callaway University's commitment to innovation. He wanted Hannah Gray's choir, and he wanted Violet Adams' technology. Together. I sat very still in the leather chair across from his desk and said, "I see. The committee feels your two projects complement one another beautifully," he said. A live choir performance enhanced by real-time AI visualization. Tradition meeting technology. It tells a story our donors will respond to. And the grant competition? I asked carefully. He smiled the practiced smile of a man who had navigated many uncomfortable conversations. The showcase is separate from the competition. Your proposals remain independent. This is simply a collaborative performance. A one-time partnership. A one-time partnership. I drove back to my office repeating those words like they were a set of guardrails I could hold on to. Violet took the news better than I did. When I told her after rehearsal that afternoon, standing in the chapel doorway with the autumn light cutting long gold lines across the floor between us, she simply nodded and said, "Good, good." I repeated, "We work well together, Hannah. You already know that." I looked at her for a moment. She was leaning against the doorframe with her arms loosely crossed, completely relaxed, as if the prospect of spending 6 weeks in close collaboration with me was the most natural thing in the world. For her, perhaps it was. For me, it felt like standing at the edge of something with no clear bottom. "We should set ground rules," I said. Something flickered in her eyes. Amusement, maybe, or something gentler than that. "Of course," she said. "Whatever you need. Whatever I need." As if she understood, without my saying it, that I was the one who needed the structure. The distance. The careful professional boundary drawn cleanly down the middle of everything. She understood. And she let me have it. That, I think, was when I began to truly fall. We started meeting 3 evenings a week in the choir room. Violet would arrive with her laptop and a small portable speaker, filling the room with test arrangements and AI-generated harmonic visualizations that bloomed across the projection screen like living things, color and light moving in perfect response to sound. I would arrive with my marked-up sheet music and my 20 years of knowing exactly how a choir breathes, how it builds, how it breaks open at precisely the right moment. We argued often in those early sessions. Productively. Passionately. She wanted to open with something contemporary and unexpected. I wanted to anchor the performance in something classical before evolving. She said tradition without innovation was a museum exhibit. I said innovation without roots was just noise. We said these things sharply, leaning over the same table, sometimes talking over each other, and then one of us would stop and listen and say, "Fine. Yes, you're right about that part." And we would find a place where both things were true at once. I had never collaborated like that before. In 20 years of academic music, I had always been the authority in a room, the one who decided, the one who knew. With Violet, I was something else entirely. An equal, a partner, someone being genuinely surprised by another person's mind. It was one of the most disorienting and exhilarating experiences of my life. The rumors started in the 4th week. I became aware of them the way you become aware of a change in temperature, gradually, then all at once. A conversation that stopped when I entered the faculty lounge. A look exchanged between 2 colleagues in the hallway. An email from the grant committee asking me to clarify the nature of my working relationship with Violet Adams. I read that email 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and sat very still at my desk. This was what I had feared. This was exactly what I had known, somewhere deep and practical inside myself, would happen if I let things become what they were becoming. Academia was a small world with long memories. A female professor and a younger woman. Whispers about favoritism. Questions about ethics. A career built over 20 years, suddenly fragile in a way I had never allowed it to be. I responded to the committee's email in careful, measured language. I explained that our collaboration was university-sanctioned, initiated by Dean Hartwell himself, and entirely professional in nature. Then I went home and did not sleep. The following Tuesday, I arrived at the choir room early, arranged my music stand precisely, and when Violet walked in, I told her, without looking up from my papers, that I thought we should keep our sessions strictly on task from now on. Less personal conversation. More structure. She set her laptop bag down slowly. Did something happen? She asked. No, I said. I simply think it's important to maintain clarity about what this is. The room was very quiet. I could hear the old buildings settling around us, the distant sound of wind against the chapel windows. Hannah. Her voice was quiet, careful. The way you speak to someone you can see is hurting themselves. Let's start from the third movement, I said. She didn't push. She opened her laptop, pulled up her files, and we worked. Efficiently.
Correctly.
With exactly the professional distance I had asked for. It was the longest evening of my life. When she left, she paused at the door and said, "For what it's worth, I know exactly what this is. And I think you do too." She was gone before I could answer. It was the anonymous note slipped under my office door that broke something open in me. I found it on a Wednesday morning. A single sheet of plain paper, typed, no signature. You should be more careful about what you make obvious. I stood in my doorway holding that piece of paper and felt something move through me that was equal parts fear and fury. Fear because they were right, I had not been careful enough. And fury because why should I have to be? Why should the most alive I had felt in 10 years be something I was required to hide? I folded the note, put it in my desk drawer, and I sat there for a long time thinking about the word obvious. If it was obvious, then it was true. And if it was true, then all my careful distance and professional language and ground rules had changed nothing at all. The storm arrived on a Friday night. We had scheduled an extra session to finalize the arrangement before the showcase rehearsals began. The weather had been threatening all day, the sky pressing down low and dark over Oklahoma City, but neither of us canceled. We had too much left to do. We were deep in the fifth movement when the storm broke. It came fast and violent, the way Oklahoma storms do. No gentle warning, just a sudden, tremendous unleashing of everything the sky had been holding back. Rain hammered the chapel roof. Lightning turned the windows white. The power flickered twice, then died completely, dropping the room into a darkness broken only by the pale blue glow of Violet's laptop battery and the distant strobe of lightning beyond the glass. We couldn't leave. The wind was shaking the chapel doors. Violet found candles in the storage closet, old choir performance candles, white and thick, and set several on the piano lid. Their light was warm and unsteady, throwing soft shadows across the walls, across the sheet music, across her face, as she settled back into the chair beside me. We sat in the candlelight and listened to the storm rage outside. "Tell me something true," she said after a while. I looked at her. "What?" "Something you don't usually say out loud." She said it simply, without pressure, the way she said most things, like she had all the time in the world and no agenda beyond the moment. I looked down at the piano keys, at my hands resting on them. "I stopped hearing music," I said quietly. "Somewhere in the last few years. I could analyze it,
Teach it. Direct it.
but I stopped hearing it. the way I used to when I was young, and it felt like it was speaking directly to something inside me. I paused. Until recently. The candles flickered. The storm rolled and cracked overhead. What changed? She asked, though I think she knew. I turned to look at her then. Really look at her, without the professional distance, without the careful management of my own expression. Just looked at her the way I had been trying not to for weeks. You know what changed? I said. The silence between us was not empty. It was the fullest silence I had ever sat inside. She reached across slowly and rested her hand over mine on the piano keys. Not pressing, not demanding, just there. Warm and certain and unbearably gentle. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I just need you to stop running. My breath caught. Outside, lightning split the sky. And I, Hannah Gray, careful, controlled, cautious Hannah Gray, who had spent 20 years choosing safety over everything, leaned forward and closed the distance between us. The kiss was soft, questioning at first, the way first kisses are when they carry the weight of everything that led to them. And then it became something else. Something certain. Something that felt, terrifyingly and completely, like the resolution of a cord that had been suspended for far too long. When we finally pulled apart, the storm was still raging. Nothing outside had changed. But I had. In the weeks that followed, we faced everything together. Catherine Wells arrived like a second storm, Violet's former business partner, sharp-edged and litigious, claiming ownership of the AI technology at the heart of our showcase performance. She threatened to pull the project apart entirely, to take Violet's work and bury it in legal proceedings until nothing remained. I watched Violet receive this news across the choir room table. I watched her jaw tighten and her eyes go quiet in the way they did when she was thinking hard. And I made a decision. I started digging. It took me a week of late nights, faculty library database access, and phone calls to people I hadn't spoken to in years. But I found it a pattern. Catherine Wells had done this before. 2 former partners, both of whom had quietly settled rather than fight. Documentation that proved the technology Violet had built was entirely her own. When I laid it all out in front of Violet, she looked at the papers and then at me, and something crossed her face that I hadn't seen there before. She looked undone. In the best possible way. You did all this, she said softly. We're partners, I said. That means something. She stood up, came around the table, and held my face in her hands. And the way she looked at me, like I was something she had been searching for without knowing the name of, that look rearranged something permanent inside me. We went before the university board on a Tuesday morning. I wore my best jacket. Violet wore something green that matched her eyes precisely, and I loved her for it, for refusing to be diminished even in the most formal room in the building. We presented our merged proposal together. Not 2 competing visions, but one unified platform. Hannah Gray's 2 decades of teaching wisdom, her understanding of how students learn and feel and grow through music, woven together with Violet's adaptive AI technology that could meet each student exactly where they were. We explained how we had arrived here. We were honest about the collaboration, about the evolution of our relationship, about the fact that love, when it exists between 2 people, does not erase their professional contributions, it amplifies them. I saw the discomfort on some faces. I held their gazes anyway. Then we performed. The choir filled the boardroom with sound, rich, layered, alive. Above them, Violet's AI visualizations bloomed across the projection screen, responding to every note in real time, turning music into something you could see as well as feel. Tradition and innovation breathing together. Old and new, inseparable. When it ended, the silence was the reverent kind. The funding was approved unanimously. 1 year later, I stood in the wings of Carnegie Hall and listened to students from across the country perform the arrangement that had begun with two women in a candlelit chapel during an Oklahoma storm. My hand found Violet's in the darkness backstage. Her fingers laced through mine without hesitation, the way they always did now, like they had always known where they belonged. When the final chord resolved and the audience rose to their feet, I felt the sound move through me the way music used to when I was young. That deep, cellular resonance. That feeling of being spoken to directly by something larger than yourself. Then I did something that careful, controlled Hannah Gray would never have done. I led Violet on stage in front of the audience. I turned to face her under the Carnegie Hall lights, with 1,000 strangers watching and our choir beaming behind us, and I said the thing I had been afraid to say for the better part of my life. "You gave me my music back," I told her. "You gave me myself back. And I don't want to spend another day pretending I need anything other than exactly this." I reached into my pocket. Violet's hands flew to her mouth. "Violet Adams," I said, and my voice did not shake at all. "Will you build the rest of this life with me?" She was laughing and crying at the same time, which I had learned was something she did when feelings became too large for one expression to contain. She took my hands in both of hers and held them hard. "I thought you'd never stop being careful," she whispered. "I'm done being careful," I said. "Yes," she said. 1,000 times yes. Behind us, the choir began to sing. Not because anyone directed them to, not because I raised my baton or counted them in, but because some moments are too full for silence, and musicians, more than anyone, understand that. They sang the arrangement that had started everything, the one born in a candlelit chapel during a storm, the one that had carried us from competitors to collaborators to something neither of us had a precise academic word for, but both of us knew in our bones. I stood on that stage with Violet's hands in mine and the music pouring over us like light. And I finally completely understood what I had always told my students. Every person carries a song inside them. You just have to be brave enough and lucky enough to find the person who helps you hear it. And if you are still searching for yours, listen. If this story found you today, I don't think it was by accident. Maybe you are standing where I once stood, safe, controlled, and quietly empty. Maybe there is something inside you that has been waiting for permission to come alive. My advice? Stop waiting. The harmony you are looking for is already inside you. It just needs the right person, the right moment, the right courage to draw it out. If this story moved you even a little, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to Love Beyond Rules. Because every great love story begins with one person deciding they are done being afraid.